Welcome to the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. I'm Melisa Lieberman, a fellow IC and business coach. On this podcast, I teach you to become a consistently booked independent consultant without becoming a pushy salesperson or working 24/7. If I can do it, you can too. Listen on to find out how. Welcome to episode 256 of the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. I am Melisa Lieberman, and today we're diving into 4 specific strategies you can leverage to reduce the length of your consulting sales cycle. I think it's really common for independent consultants, so many that I talk to, we just say things like enterprise sales cycles are a long time, or it just takes a long time to sell to corporate buyers, as if it were just a fixed hard fact. And while that can be true, I want to highlight for you here in today's episode that it doesn't have to be true, that you have a lot more control over the length of your sales cycle than you might think you do. And that's what I want to help unlock for you today, because we want to take control as much as we can over this process and not be at the mercy of corporate decision makers, which we've all been there as a corporate decision maker. And we know that things take so much longer than they need to take. And we waste so much more time than we need to be wasting. And so let's help our corporate buyers not get into that situation. And that's what we're here to talk about today. Because what I will say to you is that long sales cycles, or longer than necessary sales cycles, are rarely about the client being slow if we let it happen that way. It's usually consultant created. And if you look at it that way, that you're creating the slowness, or at least the primary contributor to the slowness, then that starts to unlock your ability to do something about it. So that's what we want to hone in on here today. So if you're thinking to yourself, well, Melisa, that's just how it is. It takes forever for corporate decision makers to make decisions, or there's too many approval levels, or too many stakeholders, or whatever all the things are that you might be saying right now, we want to put that aside for a moment and attack this episode in a way that shows you that you do have more control than you might imagine when it comes to increasing the decision velocity of your prospects without you needing to get salesy or pushy. That's what we're here to do. So that's what these 4 strategies will help you to see as we go through this episode. So here's the agenda. Number 1, I'll share with you the companion resource that goes with today's episode so you can take it deeper and apply it to your business. Then we'll talk about why this even matters. Of course, there's obvious costs of a longer sales cycle, but I want to point out to you some of the maybe less obvious costs that you are incurring and not maybe realizing. And then we'll dive into each of those 4 strategies to reduce your sales cycle. Toward the end, I'm going to share with you 6 specific questions you can leverage to self-assess and identify areas of opportunity for your sales cycle. And then we'll wrap it up with how to put this episode into action. Okay, the companion resource is my book, Grow Your Consulting Business, the 14-step roadmap to make your independent consulting goals a reality. You can go download it on my website at melisabook.com or consultingbusinessbook.com. If you don't know how to spell my name, which is a little tricky, it's only got one of each letter, Melisa. And anyway, so melisabook.com, and download that. And then in chapter 10, it focuses entirely on your sales process, building out that sales process. The chapter is called Become Someone Who Loves to Sell Without Becoming Salesy, which I can promise you it is possible for you to become someone who loves to sell. And by selling, I mean building solutions for clients and seeing if they want to move forward with you, helping them with that solution is so much fun. That's what we do as consultants, right? But we get so twisted up in what we don't want selling to be that sometimes we overlook what it can be, which is truly a consultative process. So anyway, go download the book. And it also comes with a toolkit to help you implement each of the steps. And then skip over to chapter 10, which helps you with this sales process. Okay, so with that, now let's talk about the cost of a longer sales cycle. Now, of course, there's the obvious costs. There's the financial costs, whether it's delayed revenue because the sales cycle takes longer to close and therefore you're delaying revenue while they're making a decision, of course, or perhaps, you lose deals to no decision because they've lost momentum. The problem doesn't feel as acute over time in some instances, or deals are lost to confusion. You've heard that saying, a confused mind never buys. So there are financial impacts that you're aware of that are caused by longer sales cycles. There are financial impacts, of course, that you're already aware of, such as there are those financial impacts that you're already aware of. But there are also costs that are not as obvious that you might not be noticing. And that is the mental drag of having that constant thought process in your mind. When are they going to reschedule our meeting? Wonder what that stakeholder is thinking about. I wonder what other stakeholders are pulling strings behind the scenes that I'm not aware of. Like that constant mental questioning about what's going on with the deal and whether it will move forward or not, or whether you'll be left without the deal that you think is going through and you've got to start over again. All of those things create such a mental drag on you as a business owner. So much second guessing about what's going on with the deal and also what that means about your capabilities to sell work and ultimately impacts to your confidence as well. So it's not just the financial side that is the cost of a longer sales cycle, but it's also that mental side that is wearing, that makes this part of running a business feel sometimes not sustainable and eroding of your confidence. And we don't want those impacts to happen to you. And so addressing the length of your sales cycle is important for both the revenue side as well as for your own confidence and mental and emotional well being as a business owner as well, so that you can sustain this over time. So that's why we want to address this. And I want to highlight for you again that it's possible for you to influence and impact the length of the sales cycle by the way that you're approaching it. And so that's what these 4 strategies are meant to help you with. I'm going to give you what they are right now, and then we'll dive into each one of them individually. So the 4 strategies are: number 1, expert mindset; number 2, having a sales strategy; number 3, your sales process; and number 4, account planning. So I'm going to dive into what each one of those means, but those at a high level are the 4 strategies. So let's start off, of course, with expert mindset. I emphasize this. It's not because it's nice to have. This is foundational. And that's why it's strategy number 1. You getting into expert mindset, because your certainty is what creates movement in your sales process. When you're hesitant or when you're so flexible that there are so many options on the table, the client doesn't know which way to go, it ends up making the sales cycle take so much longer or even just lead to indecision. Because when you're hesitating, your clients are then follow the lead, which is hesitant, and then they wait. And oftentimes, this is a symptom of overcorrecting. Instead of being in the sales mindset when you're selling, which means the expert mindset, you're the one making recommendations. You're the one helping them to know what the next best step is. You're the one helping them to navigate challenges internally or even within their own mind about what it is that you're proposing to them. When you come at this from that expert mindset, that consultative mindset, that consultative sales rep based mindset, it's very different than you coming into this hoping that they'll want to engage with you. When you're overcorrecting to avoid being salesy, that's what is oftentimes the driver here. We don't want to be too salesy. We don't want to be too pushy. We don't want to send them in a direction that they don't want to go in. And so therefore, we think it's going to kill the deal. But what ends up happening is that we come across in a way, oftentimes very subtly, that isn't leaderly, that isn't expertly, that isn't something that is setting the tone to help them make a decision in one way or another. When you're not coming at this from an expert mindset, you end up hedging, right? When you don't fully trust your own judgment, when you don't fully trust that the client or the potential client is going to trust what you're saying to them or believe that you know what the best next step is, for example, you end up hedging. And hedging sounds like openness, sounds like being so flexible. I'll do whatever you need me to do. Just let me know what it is. And that signals that you have uncertainty. And these potential clients are looking to you for your expertise, for your clarity, for your leadership, not endless exploration of and discovery. You getting into a mindset of, I'm the expert here. That doesn't mean that you're arrogant. It doesn't mean that you're not open to talking with them about what different potential options are, but it means that you're really confident and certain about what it is you're recommending to them. And you're recommending a next step. You're recommending this is what it looks like to go through this process to make a decision one way or the other. But it all starts from your mindset. It all starts from you coming at this thinking of yourself as an expert, not only in the domain that you're consulting against, but also as an expert to help them navigate the decision making process before they even sign a contract with you. That's where we often miss from a mindset perspective. We kind of think of ourselves in two categories. One, which is the sales process. And we think of ourselves as, I hope they'll engage me. I'm not sure if they'll engage me. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't want to be too salesy. I don't want to be too pushy. I can't control what they do. All of those types of mindsets. And then once we sign a contract, then we move into, I know how to help them. I know how to navigate this. I know what to recommend. I'm willing to recommend things that they might not agree with. We kind of wear these two completely different mindsets, and we want to be taking the mindset of they're already our client into the sales process to create that expert mindset, which is the strong foundation against which you're running your sales process. So before I move on from strategy number one, which is getting into the expert mindset, which creates certainty for you, which then when you deliver from certainty and confidence in a sales process, the client senses that and it creates movement for you in the sales process. But before we move on from this strategy number one, I want to give you a quick example. And we'll just call this consultant Jane. Jane was noticing that like these sales cycles that just were consistently taking a really long time. And to be honest with you, these were not complex deals. That we're not talking about an ERP implementation here or something like that. We're talking about a fairly straightforward type of consulting, but she was just really frustrated by these long sales cycles and the potential client constantly revisiting scope and needing to rework proposals. And in her mind, it was a bit of a tension because on one hand, she thought she was being flexible and client centered. But on the other hand, it was frustrating for her in her business that she wasn't getting to closure. For a lot of these deals, they were just going to no decision, not choosing another consultant, but just truly not even going forward with any work. And so as we were peeling back the onion, we realized that the source of this problem had nothing to do with the client, or that clients of her type don't make decisions quickly, or clients of her type don't have funds to pay for this type of work. It was actually that the source of this was that she was uncomfortable taking a clear stand, that she didn't want to risk being wrong, that she didn't want to be directional with that client. And so that hesitation that she was approaching this with, too much flexibility, ended up creating this indecision that clients were waiting or delaying or going dark, right? And so for her, this shift wasn't tactical. It wasn't about changing what she was offering or changing her niche. It was about internally for her being more certain, making very clear next steps with her clients from that certainty, or these potential clients, I should say, and making really strong recommendations to the clients. And it sounded something like, they've gone through a discovery process. She's got a proposal in front of them and they come back with questions. Of course, that happens so often. Instead of navigating those questions and turning it back into a discovery process, instead of that, she started testing this out, coming with more certainty, saying, I hear what you're saying with respect to those questions, and they make a lot of sense. What I would recommend is that we go forward with option two and we include those exact questions in the initial kickoff, in the initial stakeholder engagement, so that we make sure we address all of those. Very simple, right? Very simple of helping the potential client to understand that their concerns won't go unaddressed, that their concerns are really more on the execution side than the reopening of discovery. And because of the mindset that she came at it with, which is certainty, expert based confidence, she started realizing they were saying, yes, okay, no problem, let's do that. And they would go out with option one or two or three or whatever she recommended and move forward. But it all starts with leading with certainty, leading with an expert mindset, being willing for them to say no or we don't agree, having that initial recommendation based on coming across from a clear, definitive, not hedging based recommendation helps to move that forward, that sales cycle forward more often than you might imagine it would. So that's strategy number one, is coming at this from an expert mindset and what that actually looks like through that example. And when I get down to the questions here in a minute for your self assessment, I will share with you a way for you to be looking at this to uncover where you might be hedging and you're not even realizing it. It's not just what you're saying, it's the tone with which you're saying it that is so important. And both of those come from the underlying mindset that you're taking as you're moving through this. That's what creates what you're saying and also the tone with which you're saying it. Okay, let's move on to strategy number two, which is your sales strategy. And I want to recommend to you and offer to you that speed to value beats perfect scope. So often, I hear this so often. I don't want to leave opportunity on the table. So I want to really capture all of the scope in this first statement of work or in this next statement of work with a client, in this next proposal, for example. And so we end up trying to gather so much scope or cover all the different things that that client might need that we end up creating more confusion, more overwhelm to the client, more decision points to the client than are necessary. And we end up shooting ourselves in the foot because as we're trying to keep this broad scope and not leave opportunity on the table when we are developing a proposal, we end up oftentimes going to a no decision or a delayed decision because we've done that. As opposed to the strategy number two, to reduce the length of your sales cycle, is to offer smaller paid entry points to reduce your risk for both you and your business going to a non decision and also for the client to get internal buy in and accelerate a yes on their part. And what I mean by this very specifically is what I call the foot in the door offer. We're working on this right now in the lead gen sprint, and we've been calling it the FITD, the foot in the door offer. You having a foot in the door offer when you don't have a pre existing relationship with a client, when you don't have a pre existing relationship with people at that potential client, especially, this helps you get your foot in the door. That's why it's called that, and start building a relationship with them so they can see the type of impact that you can make for their organization, so they can see what type of results you can help them to drive. And quite frankly, so that it creates a quick impact to their organization and gives you insight. There's nothing that can replace you having a relationship with the client where they see you as their consultant, they've signed a contract with you. You flip to the other side, right? Now they see you as part of their team. They see you as on their side of the team because you've got an agreement with them. And as a result, they're willing to open up and be more forthcoming about what are the challenges in their organization. You have access to more people in the organization to see what the challenges are that your stakeholder potentially doesn't even realize are there. It gives you so much more visibility to see what's really going on. Rather than talking about it theoretically in a sales cycle, you're talking about it and seeing it firsthand. And that helps you to move beyond that foot in the door offer to make additional recommendations, to create a more thorough, robust assessment of what it is that you recommend to that client. And so hopefully you can see that by creating a two-step or two plus step sales strategy where you're initially landing work with a client as a foot in the door offer, and then having a second step, which is where you're making further recommendations and having a land and expand type of a process, right? Where that's your second, third, fourth, fifth phase is not only benefit you from a shortened sales cycle perspective and speed to revenue and speed to impact and results perspective, but also helps you build a more robust recommendation for future phases because you have that internal visibility and access. And you're not hearing it second or third hand from your stakeholder and trying to build a proposal off of insights from a discovery process. You're building a proposal off of your own insights. So that's why having a foot in the door offer is so important for you in terms of your overall sales process and sales strategy. I'll give you a quick example and then we'll move on to strategy number 3. But the quick example is John. We'll call him John, a consultant. He was at this place where he was going through these long, involved sales cycles, creating proposals, and then the potential client would tell him, no, we need to shift gears. Some things have changed. So he has to goes back to the drawing board. And it was just over and over again, so frustrating. And so what he did was created a foot in the door offer for his particular clients, which in his case was coming in and building a he is a primarily offers fractional COO services for startups, helping them to scale. And a similar type of work that I did when I was fully consulting. So he was going through this process of having this constant rework and delays, and quite frankly, doing a lot of free work for his potential clients while he was going through these processes of trying to get a scope defined and a proposal approved. And so he shifted gears. He added in a foot in the door offer, which was coming in and helping the client to build out their overall strategy to assess where are the gaps in their current operations, prioritize those gaps based on impact to revenue of the client itself and retention of their top talents, and then getting that overall strategy in place so that these companies that he's working with, which are so quick moving, are able to have an overarching plan and roadmap. Essentially, what that is, honestly, as a foot in the door offer, was a lot of the work he had been doing unpaid, trying to get proposals approved. So putting this step in front of his longer term execution as a fractional COO to have this strategy map work not only helped him get his foot in the door, start creating impact for the client more quickly, start generating revenue for his own business more quickly, but also honestly got him to the point of getting paid to do scoping work, which is great, great for him and great for his end client as well to have that overarching strategy. So they weren't constantly getting kind of distracted by the fire of the day, right? And asking him to redo proposals. Okay, so that is strategy number 2, is putting a smaller paid entry point and really mapping out what your initial offer looks like. High impact, high value, quick decision type, no brainer. What would a client want to say yes to so easily? Making that incredibly valuable and then mapping out, the land and expand type of approach from there as a sales strategy overall. Okay, let's move on to strategy number 3, which is your sales approach. So often, again, we put ourselves in this mindset of sales is one thing and delivery is another thing. Now, technically, you could argue that's true. However, when you blend those together in your mind and in your approach, it can help you to reduce the sales cycle. And what I mean by this is you want to get in a process of co-creation. When we think we need to go gather all the information through a discovery process and create a really solid proposal that they'll approve of, then we flip this switch and we start delivering. When we think about it that way, we put ourselves at such a disadvantage because we think all of the onus is on us to come up with the perfect proposal. We think that we have to go somehow understand exactly what the client is thinking and give them a proposal that they're excited to accept. When in fact, if you can think about it as a co creation, when you can think about it as how do you create a relationship with the potential clients, with the stakeholder or the decision maker in a way that they see themselves as creating this proposal alongside you, that you're in this together, that it's not something that you do and give to them for their approval, but it's something that you create together. And that type of collaboration, when you approach your sales cycle in that way, that type of collaboration will help them to take ownership of this proposal and want it to succeed. So let's talk about what that actually looks like. What that looks like in terms of co creation is number one, you knowing and creating that relationship with someone on the potential client side, whether it's the decision maker or maybe their chief of staff or their right hand person, someone who has influence over the decision maker, over the organization. It doesn't have to be the decision maker all the time, but you're treating that, you're number one, identifying that person, you're building that relationship and you're treating the process like, hey, can I run this by you? Or instead of coming up with a proposal, you're creating a discussion doc to get their buy in on, okay, I'm thinking through these couple of ways that we could approach this. Let's talk about them. I would love to get your reaction to see what makes the most sense to you and to the organization. So you're treating it very collaboratively and getting their input as you go. I had a recent private client who's working on this. It's a very involved scope that she was working through. And there were a lot of different ways that she could have approached it. But we didn't want to get into that situation where we were creating so many different options that it just created confusion and then led to a no decision or for that potential client to go to another consultant. So what she did was stage this into multiple layers of decisions. First, it was here's what you want, stakeholder. Now let's talk about there's three ways we could get that. So let's start with those three ways and make that decision. And so she got them to the place of them buying into the decision that she recommended. And then she took the next stage, which was okay, now that we chose that approach, now let's talk about two different ways we could handle the timeline of this. It could be a big bang or it could be a phased rollout. And so she gave them a couple of options there and they chose that option. And so now by walking this through step by step and getting the co creation, getting along the way, give me some budget parameters here. I don't want to be so far off base that we have to start over again. She got that that information along the way. That's an example for you of what this could look like, where you're taking some step by step, you're getting their buy in along the way, you're getting them to give you inputs so you're not so far off base that you have to start over again. And you're treating it as a team effort, not something that feels kind of separated because you're thinking of yourself as I'm selling and you're thinking of them as they get to decide if yes or no. But instead, you're thinking about this as we're in this together. Let's define an approach that makes really good sense for the organization and for what you want to be doing as a consultant. So that's what it looks like to approach this in a collaborative way versus we're on different sides of the table. Literally, imagine this. You're in a conference room. You've done this many, many times. You're both on the same side of the table. You've got a lot of papers out. You're working on things together very collaboratively. Obviously, you don't have to be in person to do this, but versus you're on either side of the table in some kind of a negotiation. You want to be thinking about it and approaching it in that collaborative way and setting up your sales cycle in a way that creates that dynamic for co-creation all along the way. I gave you the example of what that could look like. Well, let me say one thing before we move on to strategy number 4, and that is what I just described might seem like it's adding time to the sales cycle, right? Because you're getting some buy-in. The example I gave you took a couple of steps of layers to unpack, but I can assure you that I'll say 9 times out of 10, when you're taking those mini steps of co-development along the way, it might feel like it's actually adding time to the sales cycle. But 9 times out of 10 that I've seen, this impact is actually a much shorter decision making at the end of the day, because you've got that co creation, you've got that buy in, you've got your decision maker owning this process with you, rather than you gathering a bunch of information in a discovery, going back, trying to perfect the proposal, being so far off base and having to start over from scratch when you've eaten the elephant essentially. And so sometimes it takes more micro steps along the way to do this co development. But at the end of the day, it shortens the sales cycle for you. Now, of course, it depends on the nature of work that you're doing. When you're selling that foot in the door offer, you're not going to need very many of those micro steps to make that a successful strategy. But when you get to the place of a more involved scope after the foot in the door, you can certainly reduce the sales cycle with that type of co development. And even with the foot in the door offer, sometimes even having a couple of micro steps within the foot in the selling of the foot in the door to create that co development is what you're wanting to create, so that your decision maker feels like this is also theirs and they have ownership in it just as much as you do. Okay, so now let's move on to strategy number 4, which is account planning. I'll call this stop winging the deal. Stop winging it. Not every deal follows the same path. And I notice so often that we want it to be very cookie cutter. We want it to be a very prescribed situation. And it can be when you're putting in place some of the other strategies we've just talked about. Of course, getting in the expert mindset, co creating, having a foot in the door offer. We've narrowed things down through those 3 strategies. But at the same time, not every deal is the same. Not every deal will follow the same path. And having an account strategy, an account plan, an account by account plan, or a deal by deal plan helps you to make sure that you're not taking for granted what this process will look like. And so this doesn't have to be a long, drawn out account planning approach. It can be a very simple meeting with yourself, right? Imagine yourself, you're the sales rep in charge of this deal, and you're meeting with the CRO, the chief revenue officer, to walk them through how are you going to handle this deal? What does it look like? What are your risks? What are your strengths? And taking a step back and having an intentional account plan so that you're not just going in winging it. You're not just going in kind of doing what you always do and not taking that step back to think about what your account plan should look like for this specific situation. So you want to be deciding in advance who's involved. Is it just the main point of contact that you have, or does it make sense to pull in other people in the organization? How is the decision getting made? It is so common. I remember this back in corporate days, but also with consultants where you're going through and asking them about their sales process and you ask, well, how will the decision be made? And they look at you with a blank stare. You might be looking at yourself with a blank stare when you really honestly look at a potential deal you have in your pipeline and you ask yourself the question, how is the decision going to be made? Who's involved? When will it happen? What is the client's timeline? There's a good chance you don't actually know the answer. You might give an answer off the cuff, but it's not actually a true answer that you really know that the client has agreed with. You're just making your best guess. You don't want that, right? So you want to make an account plan. Who's involved on the client side? How is the decision going to get made? What does progress look like? What are the steps in the sales process? How are you going to know that progress is being made at each step? That's what that intentionality looks like. Also, evaluating at each step of the process. With my private clients and in the lead gen sprint, we work on evaluating at each step, not to add overhead to this process, but to truly know that with a sales process, even if it goes to a no decision or it goes to no, we're choosing another consultant, for example, that you create value from that process by evaluating it and using it as an opportunity for continuous improvement within your organization. So part of this account planning is who's involved and how is the decision going to get made and what does success look like? And also, how are you evaluating along the way to intentionally make the most of this process for your company and also to pivot and identify proactively changes that you want to make as you go. So that's why having an account plan is so important and that you're not winging it. I'll give you a quick example, and then I'm going to share with you those 6 questions you want to use to self diagnose your opportunities for reducing the sales cycle. But the example here is James, redacted for his own privacy. But James had gone through a process where he was in corporate, had closed a lot of deals, was actually responsible for selling and for being a subject matter expert in his organization. And so he had a lot of experience with selling when he was in corporate and had done it so many times. It was actually very natural. He has a lot more experience with selling than most of us do coming into starting a consulting business and having to learn all of these skills. But what he realized is that when he came to independent consulting, it was almost as if he had a bit of amnesia because he was making it about himself. And it became really challenging to walk a potential client through a sales process as an independent consultant, even though he had done it so many times on the corporate side. And so what he did was he realized, oh, wait a second. If I were actually back in corporate doing this, I wouldn't be winging it the way that I am. I wouldn't be driving it and fueling it off of emotion so much in the way that I am right now as an independent consultant. And so he started putting in place the exact structures that he had when he was in corporate, but in a lighter weight fashion. And that's an example of what this account plan, part of what he did was put an account planning process in place, just like he had when he was in sales as a sales rep. And so that for him helped him slow down, deliberately plan out each deal, like we were talking about, identifying the stakeholders, uncovering the risks, planning to overcome those risks, having a clear decision path, putting an evaluation process in place. So it always made him take a step back and look at the big picture. And that's what helped him to shorten his sales cycles. And that's what you can do too. So before we move on to those 6 questions, I do want to say to you that one other way to help overcome this burden and the focus on the longer sales cycle is that having more than one deal in your pipeline can also be a way to make your sales cycle lighten. Let me say it a different way. We've been talking this entire episode about how to shorten a sales cycle, and that's incredibly important. Go put those 4 strategies into action, and I'll tell you here in a second how to do that. At the same time, when you have more than one deal in your pipeline, it becomes so much easier to not be fixated and worried about that one deal and when it's going to close. You can certainly put these strategies into action, but also work on having more than one deal in your pipeline so it doesn't feel like such a make or break type of a situation. So I just wanted to recognize that as well, because that's another way to lighten the mental load here. Okay, so now let's move on to these 6 questions that you can leverage to self diagnose where your areas of opportunity are when it comes to reducing the length of your sales cycle. I broke them up into the 4 strategies. So let's start with in terms of your expert mindset. And we'll put these questions in the show notes so that you don't have to start writing them out for yourself. You can go to your podcast player, click on the link that says for full show notes, and then you'll see all of these questions. So, number 1, for expert mindset, where are you hedging or keeping things open because you don't fully trust your own recommendation? Also, for expert mindset self diagnosis, where are you leaving decisions open because narrowing feels risky to you? Those are the 2 questions you want to look at with respect to your expert mindset and where you have areas of opportunity to strengthen that mindset into a consultative mindset and therefore set yourself up to reduce length of your sales cycle. Now let's move on to strategy. The question for strategy number 2, your sales strategy. Where are you trying to sell the whole thing when a smaller paid entry point could create faster momentum and ultimately create a larger overall client lifetime value? Strategy number 3, your sales approach. Where are you assuming alignment instead of explicitly checking for it? Also, under approach, what awkward or uncomfortable questions are you avoiding that, if answered, could clarify whether a deal will move forward or how it will move forward, or create that co-development approach for yourself? Are you avoiding talking about the budget? Are you avoiding talking about timing? Are you avoiding talking about certain aspects of your deal where, if you were thinking of yourself on the same side of the table as your client versus across the table from your client, you would just naturally be asking? And because you don't have that information, it ends up making the sales cycle take longer. So those are 2 questions for you under the strategy of your sales approach. And then finally, when it relates to strategy number 4 with account planning, do you have a clear plan and buy-in for how each specific deal in your pipeline will get decided? Or are you relying on hope and following up? A 2-part question for you. Okay, those are the questions that I want to encourage you to answer to help you identify which aspects of your sales process have the greatest area of opportunity for you that you can start tackling, so that you can reduce the length of the sales cycle and also increase the quality of the sales cycle at the same time. So as we wrap up today's episode, I want to remind you that long sales cycles or involved sales cycles or sales cycles that go to no decision don't have to be the norm for you. It's not just the way it is with working with corporate buyers. You can help them drive more decision clarity. You can help them to create certainty and trust you through the sales process. You are capable of creating momentum and reducing friction through collaboration, and ultimately helping move the cycle along, whether it's to a no or a yes. Either way, creating a decision helps you in your business to know what to be focusing on, and helps the client by them knowing and not having an open decision loop, in their own list. So to put today's episode into action as we wrap up, I encourage you to go answer those 6 questions, and then also get help. Get help from a coach, whether that's me or someone else. Go get help, because as I was describing to you in that one example where that consultant came to the table with a tremendous amount of sales experience and skills that most of us don't have when we start this business, and they were still struggling. For you, it's imperative to get help so that you're not struggling with, and that you're not leaving opportunity on the table. So you'll find a link to apply for private coaching with me. And I would love to talk with you about whether or not it's a good fit working together. Go out and answer those 6 questions, apply for private coaching, and I will see you again next week. Take care.
Thanks for joining me this week on the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. If you liked today's episode, I have 3 quick next steps for you. First, click subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to make sure you don't miss future episodes. Next, leave me a review in your podcast app so other independent consultants can find and benefit too. And finally, to put the ideas from today's episode into action, head over to melissalieberman.com for the show notes and more resources to help you grow your consulting practice from your first few projects into a full-fledged business. See you next week.